Welcome to JEJUFOURM 2000. This panel is supposed to be organized face-to-face session at the JEJUFOURM in the first week of November, but COVID-19 has prevented us from gathering together. Therefore, we have adopted this, a virtual, conference setting. We will not have any audience. However, this session will be, taped and then will be aired during the formal session of JEJUFOURM during November 5th and November 7th. This session is organized part of 4 panels which APLN prepared. APLN stands for Asia Pacific Leadership Network for Nuclear Non-Proliferation and Disarmament. And we have organized the 4 sessions, and this session of achieving nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia is part of this broad, the theme, organized by the APLN. And we have 4 outstanding participants in the panel today. I will start with Professor Ding-Li Shen. He is a Vice Dean of Institute of International Relations at Fudan University. And Ding-Li has been one of the leaders in nuclear arms control in Northeast Asia. And Ding-Li was trained as a physicist. Therefore, he majored in physics and then combined international relations. Therefore, he has a fundamental understanding of basic science as well as applied setting of nuclear policy. Another presenter is Professor Tatsuhiro Suzuki. Professor Suzuki is currently Vice Director of RECNA. RECNA means a Research Center for Nuclear Weapons Abolition at the University of Nagasaki. Prior to joining the Nagasaki University, he served as a Vice Chairman of Japan Atomic Energy Commission. He is also, Tatsu has a very strong, technical background on the nuclear issues. Now he has delved into more on the policy side, but his basic training is hard nuclear engineering side. And third panelist is Professor Bong-Gun Chun. Professor Bong-Gun Chun is professor at the Korean National Diplomatic Academy, and also Professor Chun has been doing a lot of stuff on these nuclear issues. He's a convening member of Korean Association of Nuclear Policy, and at the same time he served as the president of the Korean Association of Nuclear Policy, and also he involved in the government policy making on nuclear issues, including North Korean nuclear issues. Therefore, he'll be another wonderful addition to the panel. And finally, Peter Hayes, you all know, he's a co-founder of Nautilus Institute. He's honorary professor at the University of Sydney. He's one of the most active practitioner as well as an academician in dealing with the North Korean, the nuclear issues in Asia Pacific. And he really pioneered the alternative energy plant scheme in North Korea. He built windmill power plant in nearby Pyongyang in late 1990s. Therefore, he has done a lot of work. And also he wrote a book called Pacific Powder Cap. And he's one of the first scholars who disclosed the dangerous dimensions of nuclear arms race in the Asia Pacific. And Peter will very much serve as a discussant on 3 presentations, okay? And I'll go this order. I will ask Ding-Li give a presentation on Chinese perspective on nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia, and that will be followed by Professor Tatsuhiro Suzuki's presentation on the Japanese view on the nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia. And finally, Professor Bong Jun will give us South Korean perspective on nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia. Then I'll invite Peter Hayes to give comments on those 3 papers. After that, we can have open discussions. I'll give you 10 minutes each. I know that Dutch and Bongun prepared quite extensive PPT materials on the subject, but I hope that you can keep your presentation within 10 minute time period. Okay, then we'll start with Dingni, please.
Thank you very much. When we talk about nuclear weapon-free zone, the merit of such an idea is to have 2 components. One is member country within the zone would be encouraged to abandon the option of nuclear weapon. That would make them to have no ability to use nuclear weapon to threaten other country. Meantime, this country should be awarded by receiving at least negative security assurances that the nuclear weapon state would never use nuclear weapon against them, and possibly positive security assurance that the United Nations would work with the entire world to assure them security if they are under attack of whatever kind. Then let's come to Northeast Asia. We have 6 state actors, 2 nuclear weapon states, Russia and China, and 3 countries which are under nuclear weapon protection. Excuse me, 2 countries, Japan and ROK. They committed not to have nuclear weapon, but they are happy with receiving America's provision of extended nuclear deterrence. Then we have another category of country, an illegal nuclear weapon state. DPRK claim to have nuclear weapon that most of us believe it indeed has not lied, but it is not a NPT acknowledged nuclear weapon state, so it is illegal in terms of the NPT. And Mongolia. Mongolia committed not to have nuclear weapon and is believed never to have any nuclear weapon with or without receiving any security assurance. It has voluntarily abandoned the option of nuclear weapon. That's great. And we have another actor, which is a non-state actor or provincial state actor, Taiwan. Taiwan used to develop a nuclear weapon without success. Americans stopped it. But it received Americans' security assurance, and under which Taiwan seems not to have developed a nuclear weapon. It is not a country, not a state. The good news is that Mongolia commits no nuclear weapon status. North Korea has not tested ICBM and nuclear weapon for years. That's good. We have our bar very low. Don't test. That's good. America has a bar high, abandon all nuclear wherewithal. That's very high. North Korea cannot accept at this time. The good news is Japan and South Korea committed to non-nuclear weapon status, but they receive security protection, including nuclear weapon umbrella. So we have this status. But how to promote an idea in entire Northeast Asia, which consists of those above mentioned 6 countries and 1 non-state actor, Taiwan, to have total nuclear weapon free. Obstacle number 1 is how to handle China and Russia. Would them be exceptional? They are still allowed to have nuclear weapon. Or as some of those Northeast Asian nuclear weapon free zone idea proposed earlier 10 years ago, 20 years ago, that part of these 2 nuclear weapon states would be nuclear weapon free. Russia's Far East and China's Manchuria or Northeast China, which is a part of Northeast Asia. To be realistic, I think such a likelihood is not very much within our near grasp. I cannot speak for China and my government, but I do believe my government is not ready to commit to remove any nuclear weapon which may have been deployed in our Dongbei, northeast China, to relocate them to outside of this region. I think my government is not ready, and probably would never be ready. I don't know if Vladimir Putin would be ready to remove their possibly already deployed nuclear weapon from their Far Eastern area. So let's tentatively not to have the idea that our future Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone would include any part of Russia and China. Then we have three objectives. One is could Japan and South Korea be continuously committed to non-nuclear weapon status? If they say yes, but then more questions would come. Whether America would send its strategic weapon, nuclear weapon, into Japan by port visit. US SSBN possibly would carry nuclear weapon to visit Japan for a few days, to refuel, to pay a friendship call, and to maintain Americans' policy, don't tell. I know you have a policy, three no, not to introduce nuclear weapon into Japan. So it's not your introduction. It's just you don't ask, I don't tell, but I may or may not have brought my strategic weapon into Japan at a particular point. George W.H. Bush has already announced to withdraw all US overseas tactical nuclear weapon from overseas place. So no more in Northeast Asia. If possibly they used to be deployed there. But what about the strategic weapon? And not a permanent fixture, but a temporary visit. So Japan need to answer the question. Would you tell America never bring any nuclear weapon into Japan's territorial water, territory, or territorial space? I think any Japanese government would be very difficult to commit to this. I hope my good friend Tazu would spend a great effort to make Japan to commit to this. We need a genuinely defined nuclear weapon free zone in the region. The same question applied to ROK. ROK may never have had a position, three no. And America may never had any arrangement with ROK, don't ask, don't tell. But we need a clean ROK that would not have foreign countries' nuclear weapon to be deployed there. This is the first question. Second, given the very bad situation of North Korea's nuclear weapon development, from the year 2003, when China staged six-party talk, North Korea did not have nuclear weapon. But now they have tested so-called nuclear weapon device for 6 times. No one can ever believe they do not have nuclear weapon. So this is against non-proliferation, against the early commitment. They used to have a membership in the NPT with the status of non-nuclear weapon member. Now they may want to return to NPT by revising NPT to admit them as another legal nuclear weapon state, which we would never allow. Never allow India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea to join with a new ID. No way. But at least they are not testing more. And the good news is that they had a meeting for the summit in Singapore, followed by Hanoi meeting, and another handshaking in Banmanjou. That's very encouraged. But America failed its meeting in Hanoi by demanding too much, by demanding from realistic objective that North Korea may abandon something, but they may not want to abandon everything at this time. So if President Trump would be re-elected, if he would continue to use people, advisors like John Bolton, and his like, and if American president would not change his mindset to get all without giving anything, I feel very pessimistic that the DPRK would not make such a kind of deal. They want to have a series of deals, incrementally, step by step, to move toward a nuclear weapon-free North Korea. They may lie, but at least they may be willing to abandon some to trade for some lifting of the UN-based sanction. So this is another great challenge. Third, very bad China-US relationship. This is a relationship between two nuclear weapon states, one based in the region, which is believed to modernize its nuclear weapon capability rapidly, but not a match of the US at all. The US cannot allow, is unwilling to see such a nuclear weapon modernization, so America would modernize its own nuclear weapon for whatever reason, partly to handle China. And US Marine has gone to Taiwan to have the co-drill with Taiwan's Marine, which is against the US commitment. When US normalized the relationship with Beijing, it has committed three things. One is withdraw all American armed force from Taiwan, never return. And now they return. And the US has made a law. Taiwan and the US Naval Warship Mutual Berthing Mutual Protocol Agreement Act. So in the future, if the US would send its armed ship to Taiwan, to Kaohsiung seaport, it would not be illegal in terms of US domestic law, but it would be illegal for China's understanding that the US used to commit to China not to bring US military to Taiwan. And people are talking about if Trump would visit Taiwan before November the 3rd, Trump definitely, desperately want to be re-elected. He has less than 3 weeks to go. So it looks that increasingly he would be defeated. Then what he would do? Release a paper to say China has covered up the pandemic in its early stage. So China is to take the blame. So all countries should criticize China, possibly, or possibly to generate a chance that China-US would have a collision. Almost 20 years ago, China's jet fighters collided with the US reconnaissance plane, EP-3, a little outside of China's Hainan Island. It is international space, but unfortunately, the two aircraft collided. One would never exclude the repetition of a similar incident in the sea or in the air. Maybe no one would intend to do this, but some unplanned, unintended bad thing may happen, and each would have the maximum amount of suspicion that you planned this internally. Last time China lost a pilot, US had a crisis, but their pilot team, 24 people survived. But no one can guarantee. Next time, we would have the same luck. All these military people would survive. And at a time when Trump badly needed some collision with China, he could easily announce he is a wartime president, so he may get some sympathy from American constituents. He may get more votes, possibly, than Joe Biden may get. If not this, would America do something in South China Sea? The US has made a statement on South China Sea 4 years on the anniversary, 4th anniversary of the UNCLOS PCA ruling, July the 12th, 2016. The PCA ruled China's claim over South China Sea sovereignty and benefits largely unwarranted. And Philippines won all 15 points. Americans said nothing. But this time, US State Department made a point. China's claim largely illegal. And US may be ready for something that make US take a legal and a moral high ground. US may not want to have a war, but who can guarantee there will be no unintended, unplanned some collision? So all this would make not China, unfortunately, allow me to say, to make, denuclearizing DPRK as China's #1 priority in the next 3 weeks, or even in the next 3 years. And America possibly want to make October surprise to have a summit again with North Korean leader. Not possible to win Nobel Peace Prize this year, but at least to portray this president loves peace, wants to make some peaceful settlement. So let me conclude. The idea of promoting more country without a nuclear weapon to be permanently committed to non-nuclear weapon status through nuclear weapon free zone is great. China basically awarded all such a zone with China's promise, negative security assurance, never use any nuclear weapon against any members in any such a zone. And this should be expanded. All nuclear weapon states, once they honor certain nuclear weapon free zone, they should provide similar assurance. But we still need to handle 3 things. Japan and South Korea to be a clearly cut nuclear weapon free country. And over time to reduce their dependence among for extended nuclear umbrella. America may committed to reinforce Japan and South Korea through conventional means, unless American friends are attacked by nuclear weapon first. And encouraging North Korea to have interactive, positive engagement with US. Each take a substantial action. It's parallel, incremental, not one do everything, one do nothing at a certain time. And China and US need to improve relationship if Biden would be elected, and still find a way to improve their very worst relationship if Trump would be re-elected. That would help our entire region, would give less burden to our friend in Seoul and in Tokyo, and make Taiwan and North Korea also feel secure. Then we may have a better chance for a reasonably sized Northeast Asian nuclear weapon free zone. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ding-Li. Okay, now we'll turn to Professor Suzuki. That's you?
Yes. Can you see the slide? Thank you very much for introduction. My speech is on Japan's nuclear dilemma, as you probably all of you know. See how can Japan overcome this dilemma by approaching to the nuclear weapon free zone. But so-called nuclear dilemma is two. Is the nuclear weapons abolition is the final goal of Japanese foreign policy, actually the core of Japan's foreign policy. At the same time, Japan dependence on extended nuclear deterrence by United States nuclear umbrella. On the other hand, I would like to also add one more. This is my favorite subject, actually. This is a plutonium stockpile built up by the Japan's civil nuclear fuel cycle programs, which is called so-called latent nuclear capability. How do you overcome those 3 triangles? This is a key question that I'm searching to solve these issues. All right, this is the basic position on nuclear disarmament put into the, actually appeared on the Ministry of Foreign Affairs website. The first one is talking about the peace constitution. The second one is the key feature for the nuclear disarmament. As the only nation that has suffered from atomic bombings, Japan has a duty to make known the horror associated with the use of nuclear weapons, while working toward the realization of the world without nuclear weapons. So this is exactly the core of Japan's foreign policy to try to achieve the world without nuclear weapons. At the same time, Japan's dependence on nuclear deterrence. But this is, this is the second typical foreign policy speech by the Prime Minister. This is a very powerful one alongside with the President Obama visit to Hiroshima 4 years ago, actually. I said, together with the United States, we will become a light of hope for the people in the world. Standing in this city, I am firmly determined, together with the President Obama, this is the only way to respond to the feelings of the countless spirits, victims of atomic bombs in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This is a very powerful statement made by Abe-san, Prime Minister Abe. And unfortunately, as I said, at the same time, Japan's dependence on nuclear deterrence is very strong, particularly these days due to the North Korea's nuclear risk. This is a statement made by former Foreign Minister Kono, right after the US President Trump's new nuclear posture review was published. This is actually next day, right after the report is published. It's an immediate response. This is a strong statement supporting US nuclear posture review. North Korea's nuclear missile programs pose a real threat. We highly appreciate the nuclear posture review. It clarifies that the US is committed to nuclear deterrence to its allies. So this statement actually came from the criticism by the opposition party, Councilman Suematsu asking, Japan the only one country, why we are supporting nuclear posture review? This is a strong statement made by the Foreign Minister Kono. This is also a basic position regarding the TPNW, Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. This is the time of when the negotiation started. Japan's ambassador on disarmament at the podiums gave this speech, basically the same dilemma, showing same dilemma. Japan has a mission to realize the nuclear weapon-free world. At the same time, because of the security risk posed by the current circumstances, it is difficult for Japan to join this negotiation. This is the same stance currently also continued. Because of the security environment, Japan cannot support the ban treaty. So this is the proposal we made in 2015, so-called comprehensive approach toward the Northeast nuclear free zone. The basic idea is 3+3, what DPRK, South Korea, and Japan will be a nuclear weapon-free zone, and Russia, China, and the United States provide a negative security assurance. But the important thing is also we propose a new security framework. Following to this 2015 report, last year, we collaborate with the Sejong Institute in South Korea. And thanks to Peter Hayes and Professor Michael Hammer-Green and also Hudson Peck of the Sejong Institute, we made a proposal for a more specific policy proposal to how to achieve nuclear free zone and also how to establish a new security framework in Northeast Asia. The first one we have proposed is so-called dual track approach, which means that we both approach establishing nuclear free zone at the same time try to build a new comprehensive security framework. One of the specific examples that we propose is negotiate a treaty of amity and cooperation, which is similar to the treaty of amity and cooperation in Southeast Asia. This is a way to how to build the confidence in the region. And also, there's at this moment there's no security forum in Northeast Asia, so we propose a permanent security council of security forum in Northeast Asia. And as I said, nuclear free zone in Northeast Asia. And also we propose Japan and ROK should collaborate in these efforts. Particularly, we propose that initiate corporate threat reduction initiative like United States did with Russia after the end of Cold War. All right. Although the Japanese government is not particularly enthusiastic about the nuclear free zone proposal, but never deny it. But at this moment, it's very unlikely that the Japan government will follow this proposal. Well, civil society is supporting this idea for a long time. This is a speech, peace declaration speech by Nagasaki City mayors for a long time, since 1981. actually, they mentioned, city of Nagasaki Peace Declaration mentioned nuclear free zone. And the right one is the latest one, 2020 Peace Declaration shows that in addition to supporting the Treaty of Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, please examine the plan to establish nuclear free zone in Northeast Asia. So civil society strongly supports this idea. Okay, what if Japan does not join nuclear free zone? What will happen? I think Dishen already mentioned about the possible stationing of the missiles in Japanese bases in the U.S. bases in Japan. So if Japan doesn't join, the suspicion may arise Japan's non-nuclear principles. Possible deployment dual-purpose intermediate missiles in U.S. bases in Japan may give suspicion, increase the tension in the region. And also, with large plutonium stockpile, Japan's latent nuclear capability will become international concern more. So if Japan doesn't join, the security risk in the region will increase. What if Japan joined the nuclear free zone idea? This will bring international confidence, of course, in prohibiting the stationing of nuclear weapons in Japan would increase the confidence in Russia and China, and also reduce the accidental nuclear war in the region, just as Professor Day1 mentioned about. And also, because of a negative security assurance, dependence on nuclear deterrence could be minimized. There is a concern that will undermine the Japan-US security treaty, but that's not the case. If Russia and China may breach the nuclear weapon freedom treaty, the nuclear umbrella will come back. And also the conventional forces by the US can extend the strong deterrence effect in the conventional attack from Russia and China. So nuclear weapon free zone can be achieved without breaching the US-Japan nuclear security treaty. At the same time, dependence on nuclear deterrence could be minimized. So there's a benefit much larger than the risk. And actually, if Japan does not join nuclear free zone, it will increase the risk. And finally, I just introduced the speech made by the new Prime Minister, Suga's speech at the United Nations, talking about North Korea. This is basically following former Prime Minister Abe's speech, but it's really encouraging. Japan seeks to normalize the relationship with DPRK based on idea of DPRK, Japan DPRK Pyongyang Declaration. And also, he said, as a new Prime Minister of Japan, I'm ready to meet with Chairman Kim Jong-un without any conditions. And hopefully, so this will provide a way to have a more dialogue with the DPRK. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dutch, for your excellent presentation. Now, Professor Chan Bong-gun.
So you can hear me and see this screen, right? I raised some questions. I think some of them, probably many of them were already answered, but while I was writing this, I was kind of raising questions to myself. I think we need to answer them in order to have a nuclear weapon free zone in this region. First, let me begin with why do we need a nuclear free zone in this area? And probably we could compare this area with the nuclear weapon free zone to without one. Then we could see some benefit. And then probably most important question that we have to raise was that already answered by Professor Sunding Lee very much, that why we couldn't have one, especially why have we failed in building one and having one so far, despite such numerous proposals, and what are obstacles, domestic, regional, global, present potential. And then we need to look around though. What are historical, political, geopolitical, regional characteristics of those existing nuclear weapon-free zones? Then why in this area, what are some characteristics that either deny or favor nuclear weapon-free zones? If we could find some of those characteristics, we may have much better answers. Then what will be our strategy and action plans to build a nuclear weapon-free zone? And also, I found that in order to have something, achieve something, we need to have some common understanding supported by the people. So what will be the role of these experts, epistemic community, citizens, think tanks? Already, Dr. Suzuki was doing fine job, but we need more of them. Then what will be our early significant steps toward the nuclear free zone? I can't answer all of them with the limited time, but I'll try some significant answers. Try to have some significant answers. Let me begin by just saying that probably if we listen to what people have said, and probably this area, Northeast Asia, could be the last region with nuclear weapons. Since this, the way this area is working, the way this great power is interacting and colliding, this area has been divided, and it's pretty hard to get anything done. But as we have a deepening crisis, also it could open the door toward a much better world, and people wish to have a peace. In that case, this nuclear weapon-free zone could be really a great option for us to pursue. And then the second conclusion, one of the observation was that who are main sponsors, and what is the responses of this to this nuclear weapon-free zone in Korea? As you know, in Korea we have two groups. I would call it either security camp or peace camp, or conservative camp, or progressive camp. Only I have never seen this nuclear weapon-free zone issue raised and discussed in so-called mainstream conferences, mainstream, economic security circles. But it's an issue of a small group, of from the progressive and the peace camp. So in order to have this, I think we need to widen understanding on these issues. We need to have a much wider, citizens' understanding of these issues. In that sense, I could add that, in Korea, as you know, we have this serious, division problem and the North Korean nuclear problem. So people are not interested at all anything else. I was asked once by the Japanese reports that how do you think of U.S. plan of no first use by Obama president? But in Korea, there was never an issue. And also 2017 at the UN General Assembly, they adopted a nuclear ban treaty. In Japan, lots of people know about that. In Korea, there was a non-issue at all. So global nuclear disarmament, that's a non-issue. Nuclear security, that's a non-issue. So people don't care about what's happening other than peninsula. So it's a problem for us. Then let me turn to some of this. Why do we need a nuclear weapon-free zone? Without it, we will be suffer, and the Korean Peninsula will be suffer, and the region will be suffering. Japan will be suffering. That's pretty much what has been said already. And also this North Korean nuclear problem is the problem. There is this crisis, world crisis, nuclear crisis recurred during the last 30 years, in my accounting, about 7 times. We failed to stop them for 30 years. And all these red lines, the DPRK's, this DPRK nuclear crisis, it's recurring all the time. So are we going to pursue the same denuclearization strategy that have failed continuously? Or are we going to think of some, we need to have some out-of-box thinking strategy? There could be a question that we have to be raising. And I will skip this nuclear DPRK problem. And also in the region, during the last 10 years, people have said that, greater power politics, geopolitics, history returns to the region, meaning that this area has a very high possibility of involving in great war in coming years. So if you're just complacent, we just stay in this course, we are going to be in big trouble. And also, this one, scholar said that Korea, Poland, Ukraine are in the worst geopolitical locations in the world. Korea will be in that way if we are just staying course. So that we need some new strategy and new thinking. And this map also shows that why we are in trouble. It's already this the sphere of interest between land power, sea power are overlapping, and it's a lot of global think tanks are predicting that whenever they have a New Year, some predictions, always Northeast Asia or the East Asia is the foremost flashpoint of the world. It's going to be in that way. I believe it's going to be intensifying in coming years. That's why we need something else. And then Korea has a have some special mission and destiny. Korea was the only country in this region, in this part of the world, who are continuously and consistently arguing for regional peace mechanism, regional cooperation. Japan used to be in 1990s, early 1990s. Now they stopped saying that. But Korea was, regardless of conservative or progressive governments, they are always coming up with some initiatives and proposals for, Northeast Asia or security and peace cooperation. So one of the very unique the initiative that the current government inherited from the previous conservative government is this so-called Northeast Asia Peace and Cooperation Initiative. So we are holding annual conference continuously. Probably Korea is a much better positioned to pursue this issue. And then just I want to emphasize again that why Korea's non-nuclear and peace interest, I think they are very genuine because of why, who we are and what is our identities. Divided country and geopolitically middle positioned and squeezed country, and we are globally a middle power, and we are a trading country. Without the trade, without the world peace, we'll be suffering a lot. So the way who we are, because of our identities, we are very much, hunger for peace and regional cooperation. So I think Korea needs to really pursue our dreams, though it's going to take some time. Let me say in this way. So in my view, there was various nuclear weapon free zone proposals. Either it's including regions or it's a states or 3+3, or are you going to starting with inter-Korean denuclearization zone or Japan, Korea start to begin with. But still, I think we need to have this ROK, DPRK, Japan, 3-state nuclear weapon free zone. I'm not going to use a 3+3 because much simpler way that we could get we could spread out our proposal is the most simplest form. Already there is numerous, as I mentioned, UN Security Council nuclear weapon free zone formula and the nuclear weapon free zone requirements. I think we need to better, apply them, adopt them to make things simple. And then so far, 2 Koreas have already declared a nuclear-free peninsula. And as it's been said that Japan is supposed to be pursuing nuclear weapon, non-nuclear principles. So I think 3 have very basic policy principles, though the reality is somewhat different. So, and the second, this area needs to adopt a very basic UN General Assembly nuclear weapon free zone requirements: treaties, states, boundaries, NSAs, the guarantees by nuclear weapon states, everything. We better borrow them as a package, or maybe necessarily we may begin with some elements, but while being flexible and adaptable. And then, of course, I have some jump here, but we could aim at the ASEAN and the South Pacific nuclear weapon free zone, where only Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone is a missing link here. It comprises Central Asia, Northeast Asia, Southeast Asia, Mongolian, and the South Pacific nuclear free zone. In fact, our government has proposed as one of the very significant initiative. We have calling for Eurasian Peace and Prosperity Zone. I think this Asia and the South Pacific nuclear free zone is exactly somewhat, coincide with our government's proposal about Eurasian Peace and Prosperity Zone. Then there is a lot of security steps we need to take. But I just want to emphasize here one thing. The very significant first step will be building a Northeast Asia-wide epistemic community. By my personal suggestion is that in Seoul, we need to have, as a hub with Northeast Asia, we need to have some regional peace and cooperation center. I'm strongly suggesting to Professor Moon to have this one so that we could really inviting regional scholars, and we are continuously studying what could be done, what we could be doing. And then having these regional scholars, we may be much better positioned to have a much cooperative framework. And also having networking with like-minded think tanks and NGOs. I think that Suzuki's institute is already doing it, but we could do it much in an intensive way. And also developing and promoting a nuclear weapon free zone. There are numerous ones. I think if we could have one very solid one, and with more of a common sense contents, we could be much better positioned to spread to the world and getting much wider support. And also, we need to have cooperate and having conference with the other nuclear weapon free zone states. I heard that the other parts of the world, they have conferences on nuclear weapon free zones, and probably you could join those conferences as observer, and also we may invite them to come to our way. This is the map that is showing that where we are positioned. And my last point is here. As you know, our Korean Peninsula denuclearization is coming to a certain, it's stalled. It's not really moving forward. And also, I would say that this North Korean denuclearization process could be reinforced with elements of a Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zones. This Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone is asking for regional cooperation, negative security assurance, normalization of all bilateral relations. So I think while we are pursuing our own things, they could be addressed or backed up by this general framework. And also this North Korea denuclearization roadmap, this is what I made, should be drawn to be conducive to nuclear weapon free zone. Ultimately, I think this could be combined together. In that sense, we might be in a much better chance while we are solving North Korean nuclear problem, and also will be better positioned to pursue Northeast Asia nuclear weapon free zone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Chun. It's very innovative and imaginative presentation. Okay, Peter, now it's your turn. You can make a comment just for 10 minutes, okay?
Thanks very much, Chung-In, and thank you to the forum for holding this panel. I'd like to begin by going to a couple of the comments, one by Ding Li and another one by Tatsu, which I think go to one of the core issues, which is nuclear extended deterrence. One of the issues that was pointed to by Ding Li was the issue of transit, which has long been a difficult issue in the US-Japan context, but actually affects many countries where American warships visit, but in the past also Soviet, now Russian warships visit. Of course, Chinese warships, to a much lesser extent, also visit overseas, as do Indian warships and even Pakistani warships. This is now a global issue as well as a regional issue. And Tatsu pointed out that maintaining nuclear extended deterrence is one of the three key goals of Japan in this area of nuclear weapons, and therefore in this region. And it seems to me that there is a kind of intermediate point where the United States and the other nuclear weapons states, particularly the great powers, actually stop using forward deployed nuclear weapons, especially submarines, but also strategic bombers, and on occasion, long-range missile tests as a way of signaling intention or nuclear threat in this region, at least within the territory that is encompassed by a nuclear weapon-free zone. That might include some of the ocean commons, or it might just be delimited to the territory of the non-nuclear weapon states that are members or party to a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty. But the important point here, the fundamental one, is that the reality is that the use of nuclear weapons is becoming less and less likely over time. We may feel that the risk increases or decreases as a function of rhetoric and political tension and chest thumping by leaders, etc. But the reality is that the numbers have gone down. And in a sense, as Patrick Morgan, one of the American theorists of nuclear deterrence, put it, nuclear weapons have in effect been recessed. The sword that was out in the open has been put back in the sheath and has no longer been waved in the air in such a dangerous and active manner. They have been pulled back off surface warships, forward deployment by the former Soviet Union, United States, and now Russia. And generally, strategic weapons are home-based or in the deep ocean at sea, or close to their coast under their cover of their own anti-submarine warfare forces to keep them well protected. It's actually very rare for an American ballistic missile firing submarine to go into the port of an allied or any country, because that makes it easy for an adversary to know where they are and to track them. So the point I'm making here is that even if China or the United States or Russia or any other nuclear weapons state were to say, we have nuclear weapons, we don't forward deploy them, but we will never use them except when we're attacked. In other words, we wouldn't actually extend them to deter attack on another country or to ensure that the negative security assurance that is given to the non-nuclear weapon states in a treaty, a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty, could rely on that ultimate backing by the nuclear weapon states that are party to that treaty, that none of the other nuclear weapon states will start to project nuclear threat against those non-nuclear weapon states or even actually use them. Even if that were to be said, the reality is that there will always be, so long as the weapons exist, a form of what I call nuclear existential as against extended deterrence. And countries should be realistic and realize that the weapons are already recessed. The United States is not going to trade LA to protect Tokyo. This is not going to happen. It's always been an absurd and contradictory logic. It is an incredibly weak basis for an ally to rest its security or to invest in the notion that a senior ally with nuclear weapons is going to undertake the ultimate sacrifice to protect it. And so if we continue to recess, continue to put into the backdrop as they are reduced, as the use of nuclear threat goes down in international relations over the coming decades, the issue of transit, in my view, more or less goes away. It's a relatively minor issue at the outset, but it will actually go away. In the nuclear weapon-free zone where I'm talking to you from, the South Pacific nuclear weapon-free zone, and I'm in Australia at the moment, it's just a non-issue. I mean, no one could care less, really, because the idea that American strategic ballistic missile firing submarines would visit here at this point is really so far-fetched. It's just a very minor footnote and concern. So I think there are ways to handle that in the future. The second is the comments that have been made about North Korea as a problem. And obviously it is, as Ding Li pointed out, the illegal nuclear weapon state in the region, which makes it no less nuclear armed than whatever it is. The point is that a nuclear weapon-free zone does offer a legally binding framework over, say, a 10-year period in which North Korea could commit at the outset, at time zero, to becoming a fully non-nuclear armed state and returning to the NPT. But that will take probably 10 years to do fully, with proper monitoring and verification and inspection and dismantlement and re-verification and checking of the IAEA and all the rest of it. And in the interim, they're not in the NPT. And so there needs to be a legally binding framework. And a nuclear weapon-free zone treaty is just such a framework. This is exactly what happened in the Treaty of Tlatelolco in Latin America, where it took, I think, nearly 18 years for Argentina and Brazil to come into full compliance with their commitment at the outset, because they were not willing to forego all their activities and intentions at the outset. They wanted to see how it would go over time. And I think we can envision a 2+1 formula where, well, Japan and South Korea would join, and North Korea would join at the outset, but come into compliance over time. That gives us a legally binding framework, including monitoring and verification, until the North Koreans are accepted back into the NPT. It also solves another problem, which is at the core of the legal issues with the denuclearization process, which is until the two Koreas give up their sovereign competition for sovereign control over the entire peninsula, legally, they can't, even in an inter-Korean treaty, as I understand it, create a legally binding treaty, whereas they are both able and willing and have in scores of instances signed up and fully committed to standard UN treaties, of which there are many, and of which the nuclear weapon-free zone is one. So if we create a regional, more than Korea, at least plus Japan, possibly plus Mongolia at the outset, then we do have a legally binding framework that solves that problem of inter-Korean competition until the two actually put that aside through a peace process that will take, let's be realistic, at least a decade, possibly longer, whatever breakthroughs are made. This is not going to go away overnight. So that's my second point that I wanted to make. And then there are many, many, I'll call them side issues that have to be resolved. There is, should there be a side agreement for nuclear fuel cycle cooperation? Should there be an element on ballistic missile testing, controls, sharing, cooperation on space rockets? What about ballistic missile defense? What about anti-satellite activities? What about the sensor systems and the communication systems and the nuclear command and control communications modernization process of all the nuclear weapon states in the region? I could go on. There are many such hard issues that would have to be solved through the kind of dialogue that Byung-Yung referred to, where we need to get the militaries together, we need to get the senior officials together and really work hard to address those kinds of issues. But I just want to conclude by saying that in a time of pandemic, we really need to reduce the tension. This is really critical at a global level to stabilizing the situation, to avoiding a really disastrous possible outcome involving nuclear weapons that could make it actually impossible to solve the pandemic, let alone a problem as big as, say, climate change, another existential threat. And simultaneously, we have to build a bridge to those states that are committing to the Prohibition Treaty on nuclear weapons, which also are found in our region, just to the south and the west of us. And we should not assume that at least the United States will oppose a nuclear weapon-free zone. We forget that as part of the Treaty of Tlatelolco, the United States not only provided a negative security assurance, it actually made Puerto Rico one of the areas that is actually covered by the zone. So the United States, since 1976, when that treaty was ratified and came into force, has not been allowed to introduce nuclear weapons into one of its own territories, Puerto Rico. The United States is not automatically opposed to nuclear weapon-free zones, especially the military. I think the real onus at this point to really work through these issues and lead and test the political temperature with the politicians, bring the UN into the discussions, really rests with two parties in this region. One is China, which is generally in favor of this idea, but typically is sitting on its hands passively, whereas it should be leading from behind. From behind who? Well, the two Koreas are the two obvious parties, especially South Korea, but actually North Korea. And we should not assume, even under Kim Jong-un, even with Kim Jong-un having nuclear weapons, that they are opposed to a nuclear weapon-free zone. They have a long history of proposing versions of a nuclear weapon-free zone. They have sent signals under Kim Jong-un at various moments that they're interested in the concept, and if it's done in the right way, they may find it in their own political interest to make common cause with China and South Korea to put pressure on the trilemma that Tatsu pointed to of Japan's commitment to having American forward deployed and a high level of dependence on nuclear threat. So to my mind, the onus really rests on South Korea and China to take the lead, and that's where the hope in this area comes from. I'll stop there, Tatsu. I'm sorry I took 13 minutes. I apologize.
Thank you, Peter. But Ding Li, does Peter's proposal make sense? China and South Korea working together toward the nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia?
Well, I think the other three speakers have all mentioned the importance of due process. On one hand, promoting the final realization of nuclear weapons zone. At the same time, to produce the atmosphere, the environment, which would induce DPRK to commit to final abandonment of its nuclear weapon, and also to induce other countries to remove those barriers. I mentioned 3 barriers. So this is very important. Let's not go radical. Either total denuclearization toward peace, or unless peace is upon us, then we would abandon nuclear weapon. Neither is too extreme, and let's be realistic to do both at one time. In my view, this is the only realistic approach. So for this, I would support Peter and other 2 speakers, especially at your encouragement. I decided that I would represent China to lead.
But you know, the whole point is China has been very, very passive, even dealing with North Korea, and China has been, too much sensitive to American, responses. Now then, let me turn to Tatsu.
Yes.
Look at the reality in Northeast Asia. Now, nuclear arms control now has become much more intensified. U.S. versus China, even Russia. Those 3 have engaged in this nuclear arms race, while existing nuclear arms control architecture had become jeopardized. Then you pointed out the trilemma for Japan, but I think I would say that there's one additional element. Overall geopolitical situation is getting worsened. Therefore, there's another dimension of nuclear arms race. Then given that kind of situation, intensifying nuclear arms race on the one hand, and then desire for nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia, those 2 issues can collide each other. How can you resolve that issue?
Well, I hope that U.S. Next president will go back to a more sincere effort, make more sincere efforts on nuclear disarmament. That will change the environment quite significantly in the Japanese atmosphere. Unfortunately, though, even under the President Obama, who tried to introduce no first use policy, Japan is the country who said no. So, as you suggested, even if the US president are trying to be more forthcoming on the nuclear disarmament, it is the security establishments in Japan who claim that the extended nuclear deterrence should be enforced rather than to reduce the dependence on nuclear deterrence. That is the problem right now. In that case, actually, the main target is not necessarily just on DPRK, but also on China. But China is responding to the US missile defense. So it is a complicated structure right now. But if the US becomes much more willing to talk with Russia, that will reduce the tension in the region, and China may be also willing to talk with the United States on not necessarily nuclear disarmament, but on other security aspects. And then more, so this is a chain of events, hopefully, that will lead to more relaxing environment.
Peter, do you buy that's your optimistic approach? Look,
my optimistic approach, yes.
It was the Obama administration which decided to modernize in American nuclear arsenal. Okay, and Trump just added to the momentum which President Obama created. Therefore, Peter, what did you take on those? Suppose Joe Biden get elected, do you think he may revive Iran deal? He may revive the INF treaty with Russia and etc. But overall, the direction in which that the U.S. will be containing or restraining China will continue. That being the case, then the U.S. is likely to be the primary driver of the nuclear arms race in Northeast Asia. What did you take on that one?
Well, I'm not sure that you can have a primary driver of nuclear arms race. I mean, nuclear weapons operate at such a scale of violence and devastation that you can easily have a very large superfluous stockpile of nuclear capability that means absolutely nothing other than perceptions. If you have 200 nuclear weapons, I don't know the current Chinese stockpile with 200 to 400 strategic nuclear weapons. The United States has that many nuclear warheads on one submarine sitting out in the mid-Pacific. Now, if it has another 5,000 or 2,000 nuclear weapons that are home-based to aim at China, what real difference does that make? 200 is enough for any state to annihilate any other state. So there's a lot of games being played here. And I think, one of the things the Prohibition Treaty has done is cut through some of the metaphysics and the miasma, the propaganda about nuclear weapons and nuclear deterrence to get people to focus on the core fundamentals. What the Biden people will do, you're correct, is increase their efforts to revive in some respects the alliances. They will put almost complete effort into the conventional dimension of that. Nuclear weapons will be cut back under Biden. That is inevitable. Just look at the budget now because of the US debt, because of the tremendous, huge, unprecedented costs of the pandemic to the American economy. There's going to be extreme pressure on the nuclear modernization budget. And my guess is that under a Biden administration, the triad will either shrink on all legs, naval, ICBMs home based on land, and the strategic bomber force. So the whole triad will shrink, or they'll cut out one leg, which is the ICBM leg, which is a really stupid and dangerous leg in the first place. And they'll put their emphasis on the submarines. and the submarines will hang out mid-Pacific. Now, the Russians are deploying ballistic missile submarines, 3 now, in the Far East, in the Sea of Okhotsk, and going out into the Pacific. And the United States and its allies have very active anti-submarine warfare activities going on, as do the Russians. China has very minimal forward deployment at sea of nuclear weapons. As far as I know, as far as I know, there are no ballistic missile firing submarines at sea with nuclear weapons from China. They're actually in port at this point. Perhaps Ding Li can correct me if that's wrong. But there is a clear intention to put those forces at sea over the next decade, and that will start to interact with American and Russian forces. And one of the things that a nuclear weapon-free zone should do is enable the different parties to start to not only reduce their reliance on nuclear threat, but also some of the ancillary activities that are very dangerous, especially submarine underwater activities. All the militaries or the navies of all the states in the region and the non-states, including Taiwan, have extensive submarine forces. And the possibility for some kind of underwater collision and conflict, I think, being the trigger for a flashpoint is quite severe. We shouldn't just be looking at what's going on inland. So, a nuclear weapon-free zone is not going to stop the nuclear modernization process in each of the great nuclear powers in this region. It's not going to stop their nuclear arms racing, but it can ameliorate some of the worst aspects of that relates to conventional war flashpoints involving their respective allies or friends or former allies as a pathway to inadvertent or purposeful nuclear war. And for that reason, as a very limited step towards avoiding nuclear war and moving forward to a deepening commitment both to non-proliferation and eventual disarmament, that ironically actually rests on nuclear threat, because the ultimate foundations of a nuclear weapon-free zone is the fact that the nuclear weapon states all make commitments to each other and to the non-nuclear weapon states that provided it remains non-nuclear in the zone, they will keep out, if you like. But the reality is that the guarantee relies on their ability to project nuclear threat if things go wrong. So this is only an interim step. It doesn't eliminate nuclear threat altogether, but it's a very important one. And it would bring this region into really what's now an international standard. Byung-gun showed that map. Almost everywhere on the planet is a nuclear weapon-free zone, including the seabed and outer space, except for the Middle East, North America, the territory of the nuclear weapon states themselves, and Northeast Asia. Everywhere else is a nuclear weapon-free zone.
Byung-gun.
I just want to add one point about that. While this, the nuclear arms race and the greater power competition is there, but on the other hand, we can see that the general discontent complained by non-nuclear weapon state at this NPT system is very high, very strong. So it's almost on the verge of collapse of NPT. It's not going to, it's adding a lot of pressure on nuclear weapon state. So I think there will be something from the nuclear weapon state that the way they are continuing this nuclear arms race is going to really jeopardize the nuclear NPT. So there'll be, I think there'll be some sort of a caution among them. And secondly, Biden is very serious about the nuclear disarmament and the reduction. And he was in his platform, he was saying he's going to return to JCPOA and INF and New START. He's going to extend the New START, and also he was saying that I'm going to revive this the Obama homework of this no first use. And then I think he's going to inherit very strong nuclear disarmament policy. It's going to bring in some way a change of course a little bit.
Byung-gun,
Yeah.
Your proposal on two-track approach. On the one hand, there got to be six-party summit, six-party security summit to deal with the comprehensive security issues. In fact, that's also proposed that idea. But on the other hand, there must be so-called bottom-up approach toward the nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia. Do you think that you can sell that idea to the Americans? And also, can you sell those ideas to mainstream South Koreans?
Americans could be, I know Americans will be ready to come to the table, but still, at least the minister level meeting could be very possible. And also, there is already some summit, trilateral summit and the ARF plus summit. And in those settings, I think at the APEC summit, at the sideline of those big events, I think we could bring in Kim Jong-un and have a six-party summit. That could be plausible. And also, at the very bottom line, the problem was in Korea, yet there is a lack of interest, lack of understanding. And for example, the war and the declaration, it cannot sell that. It's very hard to sell that. So there is, as I said, that there is some taboo in Korea. I think there is a couple of taboos. This nuclear weapon free zone was at first proposed by the DPRK. So people have some very negative, pessimistic thinking about it. So we need to change. It's different, it's regional, and it's somewhat different sort of things. So, but I think we are, and in general, people are, this general citizens are, they don't much interest in it. So as long as we could get some understanding among our epistemic community, I think there is a high chance for us to spread this idea of nuclear weapon free zone and selling it to the government.
That's true. I think the whole, the Bongun is mentioning about the epistemic community with regard to nuclear weapons free zone, in particular in academics, intellectual, leaders, opinion leaders, they can get together and try to publicize this idea of Northeast Asian nuclear weapons free zone. And I understand that Nagasaki has been very, very active in promoting the idea. To what extent the Japanese in the public accommodating that kind of idea. But given my understanding that the mainstream Japanese politicians are not interested in that idea, other than those few from Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Okay, all others are not paying attention to it. And how can you convince, Japanese? Because Japanese are naturally prone to so-called American nuclear umbrella. And then they are afraid that if there is a nuclear weapons free zone, then American nuclear umbrella will disappear. Therefore, Japanese are not willing to bet on this Northeast Asian nuclear weapons free zone. How are you handling that issue?
That's a very good point. I think one possibility that I'm counting on is the TPNW becomes effective next year or maybe soon. That has been widely known to the Japanese public. And Japan also, Peace Boat, they are starting to publicize this nuclear free zone idea also. And hopefully that we can collaborate with ICANN and to sell this idea too. Even if TPNW becomes effective, nuclear weapon cannot be eliminated immediately. Nuclear risk remains for the time being. And this nuclear free zone is a very good idea, intermediate step to minimize the nuclear risk in the region. I think they understand the value of this nuclear free zone, and we are working together to sell the idea of TPNW and also nuclear free zone. Some of the politicians coming from Nagasaki and Hiroshima are started to become aware of this idea, but it is still minority, as you said. So I think once the TPNW becomes a real treaty, there's a chance when you talk about, I think the TPNW should have a conference on parties within a year or so. And this kind of, I think new forum, global forum of the nuclear disarmament may change the set of mind of the politicians. I think many Japanese politicians, even within the Japanese government, Komeito, Green Government Party, they are devoted to nuclear disarmament. So we are pushing very hard to Komeito to support TPNW and nuclear free zone.
How about in Japan, Dingli? How about China, Dingli? do you have a group of intellectual leaders who support the idea of Northeast Asia nuclear weapons free zone?
I think if the zone would include Mongolia, Japan, the two Korea, and if China are expected to assure them we will not use nuclear weapon against them, I see no reason why China cannot be supportive and be active in making it happen. So again, I would echo with Peter, I would represent China to support this. But,
Peter, any final comment? Okay, go ahead, Dingli.
But I do feel that some people in China may have a greater suspicion of Japan. If Japanese government would ask China to support some, Japan initiated the idea. I think these people may want to keep a distance.
I see.
I don't know why this has been the case. I think
you mean Korea?
What I'm talking about. I hope with more exchange of idea, with more sharing the idea of common destiny, of a shared community, we can rid more and more such a lingering suspicion and be more open to work together for a more secure region in our Northeast Asia.
Peter, final comments?
Sure. Well, a nuclear weapon-free zone is not going to emerge in vacuo. It's going to be in a context if it ever does emerge. And we already have thought through, I think, in a fairly profound way, assisted by Morton Halperin and others, in China, in Korea, in Japan, in Russia, in Mongolia, and actually in North Korea as well. What that framework should be. It's a comprehensive security framework. It involves a decision-making process of the kind that Tatsu outlined, a council. There has to be a treaty of amity and cooperation of some kind to set the broad principles. There needs to be an energy economic dimension to it, in all likelihood, to the extent it deals with nuclear issues in North Korea, because that will be an essential part of what would be a relatively minor aspect of a comprehensive security agenda in Northeast Asia. The North Korean problem is big in certain respects if you're sitting in Seoul or if you're in the Korea desk of the State Department. But in the big picture of geopolitics, it's actually a small problem that can be managed and solved. So comprehensive security in Northeast Asia, North Korea is kind of almost a footnote and relatively easily addressed if you're doing the things that are systematic that will address the North Korean and other security concerns of states and security elites in the region. And so a nuclear weapon-free zone is only one of 6 or 7 of the things that have to happen simultaneously for there to be a nuclear weapon-free zone. And I just want to point out to Bjorn that actually, to my knowledge, the first articulated nuclear weapon-free zone concept was actually by the Arms Control Disarmament Agency in 1972 in the United States for Northeast Asia. Yes, the North Koreans did articulate various versions of the primarily Japanese Socialist Party articulated zone in the mid-1980s. But if you look at the logic of nuclear weapon-free zones around the world, they've either happened because there was a huge scare, like the Cuban Missile Crisis, where the world nearly ended, which led to the treaty in Latin America, or it's because there were visionaries at the senior leadership level in other parts of the world, or because there was a slow incremental process, bottom up, cities, provinces, intellectuals, universities, that slowly creates, as you pointed out, an epistemic community. Eventually senior officials get it, and they are driven by the logic of the problems they're trying to solve to a nuclear weapon-free zone as a practical spanner, a practical tool to actually solve a problem. They don't create the zone for itself. They use it because they don't have any other tools. And I predict that we will either see untrammeled nuclear arms racing and instability and roller coaster riding of the kind that we had when President Trump and Kim Jong-un were venting in 2017 through 18 with all the risk-taking and scary stuff, or we will be driven to deal with these issues in a consistent, deliberate manner. And I think that China, in my conversations in Beijing, where we've had conferences on nuclear weapon-free zone issues, we found the senior advisors in various institutes in Beijing to be very open-minded, but passive. And I think it's really important, if we're going to get a US-China concert going around this comprehensive security approach, that China not be passive, that China articulate its vision so that others can respond in kind. And the same for South Korea. They're the two sources of innovation, as far as I can see, in comprehensive security in the region.
Thank you, Peter. Now we exceeded 1 hour and 20 minutes, but let me conclude this session by making following remarks. First, the idea of nuclear weapons free zone in Northeast Asia is not necessarily far-fetched or idealistic or fictional. It can be viable, okay? But in doing that, okay, this nuclear weapons free zone idea should be dealt within the comprehensive security framework of Northeast Asia. In doing that, the summit level commitment is essential. Therefore, the idea of holding, Northeast Asian, security summit might be workable. But summit diplomacy alone cannot, engineer and drive this idea of Northeast Asian nuclear weapons free zone. They should back up from the bottom. In doing that, as Bonggen pointed out, the formation of epistemic community seems essential, okay? And also then this epistemic community should engage in kind of public education and outreach activities. And what is really important is inviting politicians, political leaders, and media leaders together, even young leaders, so that we can talk about this idea and disseminate idea and the Northeast Asian nuclear weapons free zone to the civil society in countries related, meaning big threes, okay, US, China, Russia, and Japan, North, South Korea, even Mongolia. In that way, we can engineer this idea of Northeast Asian nuclear weapons free zone. And with these remarks, I will end this session. I again thank you very much for your participation and your very innovative and imaginative contribution. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
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 Bye-bye.